What we are going to present is kind of still a work in process, but I think there's plenty to actually to show you. If we take the first slide, it has to do with the data collection. I mean, a social network analysis, which is some of us here, we do it a lot. It's not my force. I've done ethnography, very much ethnography until now, but we got this idea to maybe do social analysis on ethnographies already done. So what is that in comparison of what we already have? I mean, most know about software mining the big data from the big platforms like Instagram and X. Others, most here that works in that way, would actually do it more on a survey-based kind of social analysis. They go out and they ask people from a certain sentence. They ask them how many people you know and how do you relate to those people? How often do you meet and all this thing. But mining ethnographies is kind of we found it to be a new field, and it's basically trying to open up a new field. But it's not as new as we first thought, because then my colleagues here, they found some some people who had done this kind of stuff in the past. So I will give the floor now to Miroslav and Beatriz to explain a little what we actually have seen before.
Bueno, los intentos previos de la literatura de lo que menciona Regnar, me voy a centrar en los dos casos más de antropología y sociología. El del medio es un libro fabuloso, que a mí me gusta muchísimo, de los años 80, recomendado por el mismo Lévi-Strauss, y lo que hace es reconstruir presenta muchos casos etnográficos reinterpretados en modelos estructurales, pero básicamente modelos en grafos. Entonces, el primer autor en los años 70 ya había trabajado con esto de las relaciones de bromas y de evitaciones para construir, por ejemplo, modelos de equilibrios estructurales basados en etnografías. Bueno, hay muchísimos casos más. Entonces, y el otro caso es de Peter Berman, que es ya en sociología y en análisis de redes es un clásico. Y este artículo en particular es súper interesante y súper ilustrativo de lo que intentamos, bueno, de lo que se le ocurrió a Regnar hacer y que nosotros lo estamos acompañando. En este caso toma una etnografía hecha en los años 40 de Rose en Australia. Y él es muy interesante porque él describe cómo esta antropóloga recoge datos de parentesco, pero a través de fotografías. Entonces toma una comunidad actual y le toma fotografía a las 150 personas. Y le pregunta a cada persona cuál es su vínculo de parentesco con las fotos que le tomó. Entonces, más allá del dato típico de preguntarle a personas clave, a informantes clave, lo que hace es tener un registro mucho más o diferente de las relaciones de parentesco. ¿Qué pasa? Que Peter Berman, ya en los 90, en este paper, lo que hace es sistematizar estos datos, convertirlas en 5 matrices de 150 por 150, o sea, 150 columnas y 150 filas, o 151, no me recuerdo en este momento. Entonces, lo que hace es reinterpretar un tema súper clásico de la antropología y también de la sociología, que es el intercambio generalizado, estos ciclos de intercambio, que no son directos, sino que empiezan en un punto y terminan en el mismo punto a partir de la comunidad. Bueno, es impresionante los resultados porque se desvía totalmente de lo que dice Lévi-Strauss, etcétera, etcétera. Es un punto interesante para demostrar lo relevante que puede ser explorar etnográficamente estos temas.
Bueno, después está la otra parte, que es la narrativa, la literatura como modelo para generar también redes de personajes, que es un ejercicio que se ha repetido constantemente y que aquí vemos, bueno, a la etnografía como relato y cómo este relato se construye a través de las relaciones de personajes. Entonces, bueno, ejemplos como Los Simpsons, como Game of Thrones, que se ha rodeado toda la saga de Game of Thrones, también se ha rodeado Star Wars, un ejemplo emblemático también es el de los personajes de Los Miserables. Entonces esto nos lleva a considerar también la etnografía en cuanto a relato, en cuanto a narrativa, en cuanto a texto literario, ¿no? Que es otra forma también de abordar las redes.
Okay, well, let's get to the two books that we then digged into and mined, which is the word we use when we try to get all these social relations out of this ethnography. One is the classic of Oscar Lewis, which is The Children of Sanchez, and the other one is a book that I wrote together with my partner, which is The Children of Gregoria. We take the next slide, please. Just to give you a little context, The Children of Sanchez, for those who don't know it, but it's written by the American anthropologist Oscar Lewis and was published in 1963. And it concerns a poor family in Mexico living with a lot of violence. And it kind of shocked the world at that time. It became a bestseller. It sold more than 100,000 books. So it had quite a big of an influence. It was quite special in the very style of the ethnography. It was all told by his interlocutors, and that means Jesus Sanchez, the father, and his 4 children, which was Manuel, Roberto, Consuelo, and Marta. Those names you will see a little in the coming analysis, so just keep in mind if there's a Sanchez, it's the old one. If it's just the first name, it's the other book, which is The Children of Gregoria. That book, of course, I have much more present because it was a book that we published in 2020. So we speak about nearly 60 years apart from these books. It's also about a poor family living in a very violent, marginalized area of Mexico City. So basically, we speak about the same social, geographic, and cultural kind of area, which is also one of our arguments that we can actually compare the social network in those two books. It's also written in the same style, actually inspired by the same Oscar Lewis. So it's all spoken by the interlocutors. In this case, it's a mother with her 7 children, 6 of them with the mother and 6 of the children speaks. And the 7th one is the daughter-in-law to the last son. So we speak about a little bigger family here. Anyhow, I didn't really mention the other one. The important thing is that these books actually mention a lot of people. It's not only the family we studied, because in this book there was 195 people mentioned that take part in this analysis. In The Children of Sanchez, the former book, there was like 221 or 23. It's around there. These numbers will come up again. So we speak about books that actually ethnographies mention a lot of names. It's one of the critiques from the editors also, because they say it's too many names, it's too hard to find out. Anyhow, in War and Peace by George Goy, there was like 500 names, but that's also the biggest number of names, persons named in a book, as far as I know. So, I mean, we're still less than the big Russian literature. Anyhow, there's a lot of networks going. Let's take the next. So the similarities, they're both focused on the family and their network out in the society. They share geographic, social, and cultural surroundings, and they're written in the same literary style by anthropologists. Next. So this is not the first time that somebody actually compared the two books. It's kind of asking about it. I mean, having the same name made in the same way. The first one, actually, to make it very clear, was Claudia Longlitz, which is also a kind of distinguished professor in the Mexican affairs. And what I just wanted to show here, he wrote on the back cover of the book that he kind of, this is a very condensed thing. That's what he kind of mostly think about this book when you write on the back cover, and that was that the economy is much worse now. I mean, in terms of drugs, this is actually written in Spanish. It's for the Spanish population, but drugs, violence, gangs, all this has just turned much worse than from the children of Sanchez. If we take the next slides, I'm kind of running a little because we have a lot, but you should just stop here if it's going too fast. Edgar Morin, he's also an anthropologist, Mexican. He wrote about the two books also, and his point was the same as Longness, that neoliberalism, war, drugs, all this has just made it much more violent, much rougher. The ambient of the children of Gregoria than the children of Sanchez. If we take the next one, then, well, of course, I couldn't leave those two books untouched either. So I actually wrote an article about exactly what was the difference between those two books. And this is a qualitative analysis just before we even started on this. So what did I kind of find there? I find an expanding illicit informal economy, just like Lovelace and Edgar Morin had said, and many others. It's a very common feeling in Mexico that violence has turned mad, that they kind of turned into the new Colombia, that it's just getting worse and worse. So, I mean, we're writing also into this kind of public context. I also kind of concluded that, of course, we had an accelerating violence if we compare the two books. And, well, domestic violence is about the same. However, there was a difference in this violence, that women were actually getting more aggressive in the sense they defended themselves more. They just didn't leave men to hit them. They actually hit back. That was one of the analyses that I made here. And also, this is actually not something I concluded, but it's all these are questions we're going to ask now in a social analysis research to the same two books. So we see all these, the first four is actually something we already concluded. But the fifth one is one we will also ask here, is if economic transaction exists, there's a higher risk of violent relationships increases also. So this is an analysis that social network analysis actually enables us to do, which is in a qualitative analysis you can't really do. So should we take the next? That's a very tricky thing when you define violent relations or economic relations from ethnography. I guess that's where most critiques will come from. But just to give you an idea, it was not just made randomly. I mean, it came from a very thoroughly kind of work with the two ethnographies. I think I personally read both books like 5 times. One of them I have written myself, and then I've read them 5 times just to do this, or 6. I mean, hell of a lot. Well, sorry for my words, but it took a long time. Anyhow, first I had to define what do I actually mean when I speak about a violent relationship, and I was asking the same people speaking in the book, what do you mean? Because they actually do say it. And they speak about emotional violence, about verbal violence, they speak about physical violence, about supernatural violence, they speak about sexual violence. All this is figure in the book, when they speak about their relationship to other people. I'm not going to get into all these sentences because that would just take too long. It's just to say that it was based on hundreds of sentences telling a little, and I could just read one of them loud. Like the words he said were worse than whip slashes. I mean, so there's something about the verbal violence was actually considered by Consuelo harder than physical violence. Should we take the next one? So what is violence for the children of census? This is then kind of the summary of all this reading. And this I just wanted to read loud because to get an idea that the children of census is illustrating that the children, their family, friends, neighbors, and acquaintances define violence in a broad and nuanced way. For them, violence was normalized and internalized, be it verbal, emotional, sexual, physical, or supernatural. Most of the time, it was viewed negatively. However, fights between gangs or peers were sometimes described in positive terms. For instance, Manuel mentioned his wonderful fight with a fellow from the same street. The many testimonials also disclosed that emotional and verbal abuse often is seen even more damaging than physical violence. Okay. Can we then compare the two books? Are they actually speaking about the same violence 60 years apart? So I did the whole thing again with the children of Gregory. The same procedure, found the same kind of violence and nothing else. And this is once again the summary of that. And here it's like Gregory and her children also describe violence as a mixture of verbal, emotional, sexual, physical, and supernatural. Like the censuses, they also suffered largely from everyday violence, but find occasionally also pleasure in fighting and scaring others. To fight and to be humiliated is seen as a normal part of life, whether it be at home, in relationship, or in the community. So they were basically agreeing in those books about all these kind of different types of violence that they live in their daily life. So how to actually measure this? Because there's many different kinds. Well, our question when we minded then to the ethnography became who exercised violence on whom? Because we're interested in the relationships. So, okay, that person exercised violence against this person. And there we had, so kind of the next thing was to what degree do people receive violence ranked on a scale from 0 to 5. And here I decided to sum up all these violences. So it's kind of if there's physical, often there are many at the same time. So if there's sexual, physical, emotional violence at the same time during long periods, well, then it was a severe kind of violence that this person was receiving. And the same I did with all the relationships found, violent relationships, because not all are violent, but with all the violent relationships, I did the other way around when it was actually the aggressor has given violence. So they were all defined according to how much violence did they receive and how much violence did they give. Many of them actually turned into mutual kind of violence. I mean, they fought in between. And there's the fourth question I also asked all of them. Are the family blood affinity? I mean, are they partners? Are they brothers? Are they fathers? What? Or are they from outside? Neighbors, police, gang members, whatever. So that was also a date that I could mine from the above. Next slide. Then defining economic transaction, it was the same procedure as with the violent transaction. Reading all this, what do we speak about? If we kind of see, these are all examples. I say this is an informal kind of economic relations with general exchange. I'm using signings here, general, negative, and balanced exchange. So I kind of made this with all the relationships and all the relations that actually went into it. Let's take the next slide just to. So here's kind of the summary once again. And so how do they define economic transactions, and how do we define it when we mind it? For the censuses, economic relations are closely tied to family, survival, and moral integrity. Money and resources are shared, borrowed, and carefully managed, reflecting a constant negotiation between scarcity and obligation. Work, whether formal, informal, or illicit, serves to keep the household afloat, and economic ambitions are often centered around improving the collective well-being of the family. However, many of the transactions are not mutual. I mean, generalized or balanced exchange would be the mutual one, where you kind of have goes both ways. Stealing and corruption are negative exchanges. And Jesus Sanchez, which is the head of the family, Santa's children, the children of Santa, sorry. He's basically also giving. Often you find fathers and mothers giving and not really receiving, or fathers are not really away. So here I'm actually not taking on a lot of the literature of, I mean, that you give back to your parents when you turn old. I think you should be braver if you disagree about this, because here there's certain kind of exchange, which is basically idealistically is that we have an exchange, but I mean, I speak about economic things. But how do I define economic? Well, that's the next slide. That's also important. No, I do the same thing with the children of Concordia. Let's just run over this because it's basically the same. Here, the conclusion. So here comes the central question once again: how to mine the ethnography, the monographs. And here, the main question was who transfer food, money, shelter, and services to whom? I mean, where there is a transfer of some kind of a service, can be taking care of the animals. For instance, there were some animals that some had to take care of. Shelter is when you open your house for people coming from, because they can't stay in their own home, then they come to your home, often because of violence. But it's also giving something, providing something. Money, well, it gives itself. Food also, but it's often something that kind of is exchanged. To what degree do people receive economic transaction, ranked on a scale from 0 to 5? That I also asked in all the relationships that I found, where there was some kind of transference. To what degree do people provide? I mean, again, it's directed. It's all that give and all that receive. So it's kind of all these relationships are directed. And again, I ask if they are family. I mean, the relationship between these two persons, if it's blood relationships, if it's affinity, or if it's somebody from outside, a neighbor, police, patron, client. And from what source do people achieve their income? That was kind of an extra clause in it, and it's here I kind of tried to dig in the ethnography to see if it was formal, informal, or illicit. Next. There's an important note on reciprocity. As with violence, also in economy, I think I already said it actually a little, but it's not like there's always reciprocity in those relationships. Quite often there's not actually. Often children just receive beatings, they don't give it back. Often they also just receive food, they don't give food back. And the same, the police, for instance, they beat their prisoners when they torture them. It happens in those books, but they can't beat back. I mean, so it's kind of one way. So it's not like all these relationships are actually going both ways, which breaks a little with normal economic theory. But at least science had this negative reciprocity, which is basically stealing, and where there's nothing coming, it's only going one way. Next. There's also an important note on time, because both books are actually the product of 8 years of fieldwork, 10 years of fieldwork. So there's a long time you're following these people. So how do you actually take a snapshot of such a long period? And the easiest way to say how I did it is basically to show it. So if we take the next slides. This is all the sentences where Lupita is mentioned having some economic transactions with somebody else. And I think it's a good example because Lupita is not a central figure in the book of the Children of Scientists. She doesn't have a voice on her own, but still she's mentioned in 17 sentences. At least I found her in 17 sentences. And from all these 17 sentences, I could actually interpret quite a few economic translations. You take the next slides. Then it's probably easier just to read aloud here because I can't tell it better than it's written. But from the above voices, we are told that Lupita had a long-term relationship with Jesus, filled with neglect and abandonment. He fathered his and Lupita's daughter, Antonia, but was often absent during her pregnancies and rarely helped financially. According to Consuelo, Lupita expressed bitterness about this, noting that he would disappear and only give minimal support. Yet they maintained a connection, and Jesus eventually cared for Antonia during her illness, which was a long-term psychiatric illness. Jesus also seemed to have shown more affection and joy in Lupita's home compared to his interaction with his other family. Kristensen, me, interpreted from this that Jesus' economic transaction to Lupita were over the years relatively low. I gave it a 2 on the scale from 0 to 5. Since Jesus and Lupita worked in the same restaurant all the years described, that was where they actually met, we rated that Lupita received a higher and much more stable economic transaction from the restaurant owner, which was given a 5. I mean, so it's based on interpretation, but from all this information you can actually get from the book. She didn't only receive, as you see, she also gave. So in the same text, we could also see that she actually sacrificed herself for her daughters all the way through. I mean, her sacrifice was she provided for them, and we evaluated this as a prolonged economic help. I mean, food, shelter, and all this, and ranked it 5. Because they were always welcome there. I mean, she had 4 daughters herself, 2 with Jesus. But not only was she sacrificing herself for her own daughters, she also helped taking care of Jesus' animals. So that we ranked to a 1, which is now going the other way. I mean, she received 2 from Jesus, but she gives 1 back, taking care of some animals, because it was a short period of time. It was not long. Her home also served as a refuge for Jesus' other daughters when they were fleeing from the violence in his home, especially for Consuelo, which we ranked 2, and less for Martin, which was ranked 1. So if we see all this, actually gives us the 17 sentences gave 8 weighted economic relationships, 1 of receiving, 1 of mutual aid, and 1 or 6 of providing. So that was the outcome of this little bit of text you saw. And here you see just a snapshot from the Excel page where all this is registered. This is the notes. If we take the next one, which is probably more interesting, this is the violence. And here you see how we noticed that, I mean, 1 is Jesus. He had a violent relationship with number 5. I can't remember who it is. It was weighted to 3. It was affinity. It means that it was not a blood relation, but a political, some kind of in-law. And then there are some other things that I also noticed. But this is basically the data that was mined out of these 2 ethnographies.
Sorry, degree of relation is closeness? This is the degree of relation. What does it mean?
Degree of relation is closeness, yeah.
Okay.
It's closeness. It is based on how many generations and how many affinity steps.
Steps.
Sí,
So
es para parentesco.
Okay. Yeah.
it's only for the kinship part. Mm-hmm. I will just give the first two results, which was basically just to count. And then I'll give the floor to Beatriz. But the count was quite easy. I mean, it is an informal formal economy. How does that work? Well, it showed the same as the qualitative analysis. You can see here that there was 26 of ethnicities here. There's 59 in Romero and 26 in Sanchez. So it raised that part. At least my first analysis got right. In formal notes, it actually went a bit down from 101 to 73, and the formal ones were a bit the same. So you can say that there was a rise in illicit relations or illicit trade, and a fall in informal. So it became more kind of illegal what was going on. And the level of education, well, basically it's a bit the same. The only interesting thing that came out of this was that the literacy was eliminated in this period, in these 60 years. But they're still low on the education level. And now I give the floor to Beatriz if we get to the real result.
Bueno, una parte muy interesante de este ejercicio fue que, a diferencia de un texto escrito, de algo literario, donde tú puedes suponer las relaciones, aquí yo constantemente podría preguntarle al autor si estas redes tenían sentido o no. Entonces, bueno, estuvimos haciendo un ejercicio de, ¿te parece que esto está correcto? No por desconfiar ni de lo cualitativo ni de lo cuantitativo, sino por hacer este puente entre lo que observamos cualitativamente, el traslado de lo cuantitativo y después la interpretación de lo cuantitativo. Entonces, había un ejercicio continuo de estar preguntando, ¿te parece que este está bien aquí situado, que esto tiene sentido, que esta red es así? Y bueno, se hicieron las redes, estas 4 redes que son las que ya comentó Regnar, de las relaciones económicas de los Sánchez, las relaciones de violencia, las relaciones económicas y las de los Romero y de violencia de los Romero. Una cosa que nos sorprendió a ambos es que no hay tantas diferencias como pensábamos en un momento. Es decir, a pesar de que han pasado estos 60 años, podemos ver que hay bastantes similitudes. Vemos, por ejemplo, que la densidad de la red económica de los Romero es más amplio, y esto se corresponde justamente a que son más hermanos, que a su vez tienen más difusión en sus redes, y que al convertir esto que decía Regnar de informal a ilícito, hace que también estas relaciones económicas cambien y se tengan que segmentar mucho más, ¿no? Entonces eso hace una red que aunque no es tan densa, bueno, abarca más espacios. Después vemos también que más o menos participan el mismo número de nodos en las redes, o sea, aquí un 70% del total de estas 215 personas participan en las redes económicas, acá un 155. Y bueno, una cosa que aquí llama la atención es que el audigree de las redes económicas, es decir, aquellos que dan, son en ambos casos los cabezas de familia. En este caso, el audigree corresponde a Jesús Sánchez, y en el caso de las redes económicas corresponde a Gregoria. Es decir, tenemos una relación claramente jerarquizada en lo que se refiere a repartir recursos al audigree. En las redes de violencia tampoco encontramos mucha variación, ni en lo que se refiere a la densidad. Quizá vemos, y mucho menos en los nodos que participan, porque proporcionalmente vemos que aquí hay un 57% de nodos participantes y aquí un 56%. Y bueno, vemos que aquí sí que hay diferencia, por ejemplo, entre el audigree, es decir, quien da violencia, que en este caso sería, o quien reparte violencia, por decirlo de alguna manera, quien ejerce violencia sobre otro, que en este caso sería Manuel, y en el otro caso Gregoria, porque son diferentes formas de dar violencia. En cambio, algo que sí observamos es que quien tiene mayor indigree, es decir, quien recibe más violencia, también tiene más intermediación. Y esto tiene lógica porque, como veremos más adelante, además de que hay unas relaciones interfamiliares violentas, también esta intermediación hace que estas relaciones de violencia se vayan hacia otros grupos que corresponden en cierta forma también con lo que nos muestran las redes económicas. Sí, la siguiente. Bueno, esto es más o menos lo que ya comenté, las densidades. Aquí hay una variación en las densidades. Las dos redes, pero específicamente la de Sánchez muestra más conectividad y complejidad con nodos más centrales. Y la de la red de los romeros está más distribuida en diferentes estructuras. Como veíamos en los gráficos, hay más ramificaciones hacia otros sectores que trascienden al parentesco.
Puedo yo solo hacer
Sí, sí.
Y eso es justamente contrario a lo que Lomnitz, Edgar Morin y yo mismo habíamos analizado cualitativamente. Porque aquí es más o menos lo mismo. Y ahí sí era un claro subida de nivel de violencia.
Bueno, aquí hemos dividido a verdes, hombres, morados, mujeres. No se aprecian muy bien los gráficos porque son bastante extensos y con los nombres se pierden mucho. Pero bueno, aquí más o menos hablamos de la intermediación. ¿Quiénes sirven de brokers para comunicarse con otros sectores de la red? Tenemos en la económica, que Jesús Sánchez es el que ejerce mayormente esta mediación, y en el caso de la red económica de los Romero, Mario, que por su parte también aquí se corresponde con la violencia. ¿Por qué? Porque las relaciones económicas de Mario traen aparejadas también relaciones de violencia, porque suelen ser relaciones ilícitas o informales, y aquí vemos una correlación entre esos dos tipos de relación y la intermediación que ejerce Mario. Bueno, esto es más o menos lo que se había dicho antes. A la economía informal, Jesús y Mario ejercen el control porque son capaces de llegar y de difundir estos recursos a más áreas de la red. Y bueno, en las redes económicas de carácter ilícito o informal, los nodos con alto bit-witness suponen un acercamiento de recursos que no se proveen institucional o formalmente. Por ello son especialmente importantes en estas redes. En lo que se refiere a las redes de violencia, brokerage, estos brokers también pues reparten y reciben mayor violencia con otras partes de la red. Y bueno, esta intermediación permite llegar a partes más periféricas de la red, que son, por ejemplo, conglomerados que nos hablan de personas que estuvieron en la cárcel, que forman un conglomerado específico de personas que participan en cierto tipo de actividades ilícitas con alguno de los hermanos, o particularmente con Roberto Colmario, que son los que tienen más difusión en la red. Y bueno, aquí también hay una nota sobre la diferencia del bit-witness en las redes dirigidas que en las no dirigidas. Aquí también tenemos un poco más de margen de interpretación por el tema de la dirección de los flujos de la red. Es decir, en una red no dirigida, el flujo es simétrico. En las redes no dirigidas, pues son asimétricos. Bueno, estas son las redes de violencia mutua, es decir, descartamos a todos aquellos que no ejercen, o sea, aquí la violencia, hay reciprocidad en la violencia. Entonces, aquí también hubo una sorpresa por parte de Regnar en lo que se refiere a, vemos, por ejemplo, que a pesar de que la red de los Romero era una red mucho más atomizada, difusa, con más partes periféricas, con más clústeres menos conectados en el centro, la violencia mutua se ejerce en el ámbito familiar. Las flechas azules nos muestran affinity, parentesco por afinidad, y las flechas rojas nos muestran consanguinidad, blood. Entonces vemos que estas son redes mayormente familiares, mientras que acá tenemos una red más dispersa que también se concentra en la familia, pero que es capaz de ejercer violencia mutua con esta parte más periférica, que son los cuates, ¿no? Los amigos, son otras relaciones que también son mutuas. En cambio, aquí o se ejerce violencia o se genera violencia, que también tiene que ver con la parte del crecimiento del ilícito, y vemos aquí pequeños relaciones diálicas de violencia entre mujeres. Aquí hay una relación muy específica que es con un grupo como de una especie de pandilla de mujeres, ¿no? Las diablas. Entonces, este es como un clúster bien específico de una relación de violencia mutua enclaustrada aquí. Sin embargo, todo lo demás se corresponde más al ámbito familiar por afinidad o por consanguinidad.
Sí, un poco intentamos hacer preliminarmente algunos modelos con ERGM, que bueno, acá son gente más experta, Miranda, Kiara, tomando ciertas estructuras, tratando de encontrar ciertas estructuras como básicas que explican la red de violencia. En este caso no tomé degree o actividad o expansividad porque creo que podría haber, como mencionaba la Beatriz, un poco quizá refleja no la naturaleza de la violencia, sino que la naturaleza de la propia etnografía, que era centrarse en una familia y ver cómo se distribuía la violencia en la red. Entonces, tomé estas pequeñas estructuras para poder entender la red de violencia que en las dos familias. Tomar lo que venía diciendo Regnar y Beatriz, que era la importancia del género, si había dinámicas de hemofilia, y la importancia que mencionaba Beatriz ahora al final, de las relaciones económicas, cómo podrían explicar o predecir o qué naturaleza existe ahí con respecto a la violencia. ¿Qué nos damos cuenta? Este no es un modelo final, pero en este caso de los Sánchez, bueno, la reciprocidad es un elemento clave en este caso, que existe violencia mutua. Por otro lado, un elemento clave también es las relaciones económicas, que de alguna forma nos corrobora un elemento que venía mencionando Beatriz, que era que las relaciones económicas de alguna manera logran predecir el comportamiento de las relaciones de violencia. En este caso, en las relaciones económicas, lo que hicimos no es tomar la red entera de relaciones económicas, funciona igual, tiene un comportamiento similar, pero lo que pasa si es que filtramos relaciones económicas domésticas, que era lo que mostró Beatriz en el final, mejora la estimación. ¿Qué pasa? También hay otro elemento clave que es la homofilia. Aquí quizá era un tema que discutíamos con Regnar, es que en las dos redes no se presenta violencia de hombres a mujeres y mujeres a hombres. No explica el comportamiento de la violencia en las redes, sino que hay un comportamiento más de homofilia, o sea, mujeres violentan más, hay una tendencia a eso, de mujeres violentando más a mujeres y hombres violentando más a hombres. ¿Qué más? Bueno, hay unas pequeñas estructuras bien interesantes que son transitivas. No vemos relaciones cíclicas. O sea, la violencia en este caso no tiene un patrón cíclico, que era una cosa que nos interesaba indagar, pero sí un patrón transitivo, ¿cierto? Entonces, que es el que se ve ahí en la tercera fila. Bueno, como no quisimos agregar el componente de degree o expansividad, etc., la simulación, si uno toma este modelo y lo logra, a la izquierda está una simulación a partir del modelo que les acabo de mostrar, y a la derecha está la red de violencia real. Entonces, si se fijan, tienen más o menos una similar estructura. La diferencia era que yo veía que yo sacrifiqué un poco el ajuste del modelo, que era, si agregaba esta idea de low degree que mencionaba Beatriz al inicio, se parece un poco más pero lo que pasa es que simula mucho. Yo me cuestiono acá, quizá aquí después podemos hacer una. Me gustaría que me retroalimentara en este caso, que puede reproducir más que la red de violencia, reproduce los límites de la etnografía, que era centrarse en la familia como tal. En el caso de los Romero, que era el caso de Regnar, pasa exactamente lo mismo, o sea, tiene el mismo patrón, tiene las mismas estructuras que funcionan en el caso de los Sánchez, se repitan en este caso. O sea, hay homofilia, las redes económicas son muy importantes, la reciprocidad también, etcétera, etcétera. Esto de alguna forma, bueno, nos corrobora ciertas cosas que tienen que ver con que, bueno, la economía importa para dar cuenta de las relaciones de violencia. Como es evidente, la violencia es recíproca. Si yo te doy violencia, recibo violencia de vuelta. Y la violencia tiene un componente homofílico, que se reparte hombres a hombres y mujeres a mujeres. Bueno, aquí se ve un poco más fea, pero tiene que ver precisamente porque quité este componente.
Bueno, y para acabar, digamos, solo para sumar, sí, no sé si Alice or if you are convinced, but at least I was convinced that there came new material of just doing this in these old ethnographies. Basically, if I was doing the weighting, and it gave a different result than what I expected. I mean, so if I should have been biased here, then it should at least have shown something different. So that actually going into these details, you basically can actually make an additional analysis of ethnography already done. And I think we see big possibilities also in trying doing this better. I mean, this is too much work, I guess, for many people, just to weigh all the relationships. We speak about, I don't know, how many would it be? 1,000 relationships I had to kind of weigh in. I mean, adding up those books. I also tried to do kinship in a certain period of time, but I was just drowning. But AI, I mean, artificial intelligence can help a lot here. And I'm trying now just to see how to kind of train some artificial intelligence to do this job for me, or at least to help doing it. And we hope that this might could also construct something to actually retake a lot of other ethnographies, because this is the flagship of anthropology. There's so much material that we probably haven't really analyzed or could use another analysis. But of course, there's also benefits and pitfalls, weaknesses, and I just put some of them up here. I mean, reliability, data mined. I mean, I tried to find out, okay, what's the benefits here? The data mined is based on long-term research. I find that a big benefit. It's not just depend on in the mood of a person when you ask them. If we speak about the survey kind of there, it's just a moment, while this is actually a long period. You kind of try to figure out the economic or violent relationship or any other relationship. I also found that it probably is a benefit. I would say it's a benefit that it's just me and not 200 different people weighing this kind of violent relationship, for instance, because 200 people will perceive violence different and they will have a different way. So now it's actually me doing it in a syncrecy of all the text done. So, I mean, that way I can probably get more validity. It's also an inverse take. I don't know if it's a benefit or not, but I think it's interesting. We started with an integrated network of relationship rather than each individual's view on the network. So we had the whole network to start with, and not just people making it up and getting it into a network. It's not only the inverse take, it's also an inverse analysis. It's a deductive analysis because we have the material already there. Of inductive collected data, which is ethnography. I mean, there you actually are out there and you try to get surprised and find things, while here we can't really get surprised of any other thing than the analysis we make, but it's not the material that so surprises us. We have the old conclusions, as we just did here. Okay, everybody thinks there's more violence. Well, it shows it's pretty much the same. There's differences in how the violence is actually between gender, or no differences. I mean, but it brings new knowledge in that way. But we have the old conclusions that we can use as hypotheses. And then we have the effect descriptions. I mean, we can always, like Beatriz started out saying, we can always go back and does this really ring with all the descriptions? I mean, is it like this? I mean, we found also mistakes I have made in the Excel arc, in the Excel pages. I mean, of course, now it can't be. There's something wrong there, and certainly it was just a mistake, a typo in the Excel arc page. Sorry. If we take the other one, which is weaknesses. Next slide, please. So of course, there's also some weaknesses. The data mined is already mined by another researcher. I mean, we already work with cut networks. So, I mean, we're not open for all the networks that also might be there, but the former researcher cut out because it's not interesting research that he was doing. The people who are participating are not systematic questioned the same prompt. So we don't really know if they actually mean what we interpret from this relationship. I mean, since they were never really asked it. I mean, if we didn't ask them, how do you rate your relationship with your partner? Is it violent? If it's violent, how would you rate it? It's between 0 and 5. I mean, we kind of took it out of the text. The focus, of course, we will also find the focus that's already done in these ethnographies. I mean, there's no coincidence that I chose to look at economy and violence. That's not really, I mean, that's probably the two most interesting themes in these two books. But it could have been anything else, but it doesn't bias in terms of what focus you can actually put on your material. And it's family-centered. I mean, I think that's, Miroslav, you already have mentioned it. It has some problems in terms of, but is it a bigger problem than any other network you're doing? It's basically the same, isn't it? So what do you think? I mean, we will open the floor for discussion. Do you see any prospects in this?